Instagram content plans fail all the time. And it's not because you're lazy, it's not because you're being inconsistent. Today, we're going to talk about exactly why Instagram content plans fail, and then we're actually going to get into how to do your Instagram content planning. Hi, my name is Candice Davis Blackman, and I am a content marketing strategist. I serve expert service providers, helping them turn their expertise into strategic content so they don't have to depend so much on referrals all the time. They also don't have to behave like a full-time content creator just to get the word out about their business. So stick around, we're going to get right into it. All right, one of the biggest reasons why Instagram content planning fails is because people get into planning before they do strategy. That's right. You always strategize before you plan. So do not go into plugging topics into a content calendar and thinking that that's all you need. No, they're critical foundational questions that you need to answer first. And those questions really amount to your strategy. And just for clarity, your content strategy really answers questions like, who are you targeting? What's the purpose of the content that you're going to produce? What is it actually going to do for your business? What are those key messages that you have? What are those categories or themes of content that you want to stick to so that you can emphasize your brand positioning to your audience and people are very clear on who you are and what you are about? If you don't take the time to do that, then you're going to end up with some gaps in your content planning. You're not going to exactly know what topics make sense for you. You're not going to understand what the contents of your messages should be, and you're certainly not going to know what next steps you need to guide your audience to after you've delivered a piece of content. Now, we're not going into content strategy today, and that's because I have other videos on my channel that deal with content strategy, and you can just go take a look at that. Today, we're actually going to talk about how do you plan Instagram content. But I just wanted to get that out of the way and let you know in no uncertain terms, do not do planning unless you have built your content strategy first. All right, with that done, let's get into the elements of Instagram content planning. Now, what does Instagram content planning involve? Well, I think there are at least 4 steps that you need to take into consideration. The first is what everybody always thinks about. That's actually coming up with your content ideas or content ideation. The second is creation. So this is where you're actually scripting or recording or laying out your graphics, pulling your graphics together, that sort of thing. The third step is editing. And this is where you're actually polishing your content and getting it ready for the next step, which is distribution or publishing. Now, if you don't recognize that there are actually at least 4 steps involved in content planning, then you're not going to set aside enough time for each of those activities, and you're going to be setting yourself back before you even begin. And now, if you stick around to the end, I've got one pro tip that's going to help you realistically manage all of these activities. All right, so let's get into step 1, which is content ideation or coming up with content ideas. How do you come up with content ideas that are actually usable as a service provider? Now, I have to say that this is one step that actually involves several micro steps, all right? And so I'm going to get very granular here just so, again, you understand what's involved and you realistically manage your expectations with regard to this step. Now, this is one step that I do advise that you batch, meaning you should really set aside one day in every month or in every quarter to sit down and brainstorm your content ideas. Now, why is batching content ideation so important? Well, let's say you only come up with 1 or 2 content ideas. When you're ready to record or write those ideas, what happens when you're not in the mood to actually write or record those ideas? You're going to have to go back to brainstorming ideas. So you have to go back from scratch and then you lose momentum. All right, that sets you back. So that's why it's so important to at least set aside one day, again, in every month or in every quarter. It all depends on your planning periods. Sit down and brainstorm a whole pool of content ideas. So when it's time to write, create, record, you can actually draw from that pool of content ideas. And so you're never going to get stuck if there's 1 or 2 ideas in there that you don't feel like you want to move forward with. All right. Does not just make sense? I know it does. And this is how we actually get into coming up with content ideas that are actually worth having, okay? And there are a few elements that I do think you need to take into consideration when you are brainstorming your content ideas. The first element is your marketing objective. And again, this is something that you would have given thought to in your content strategy phase, all right? So what is the purpose of the content that you are going to be creating for the next month or the next quarter? Is it that you're having a launch and you need to gather ideas to support that launch? Is it that you're going to be doing some awareness building and you need ideas that will help you gain visibility? Are you planning on doing any lead generation? Are you planning on selling? So then you need to come up with ideas that fit these different objectives. And furthermore, if there are certain marketing activities that you're going to be pressing into in your planning period, then again, you are going to need to come up with content ideas that support those activities. So if you decide that you want to press forward with looking for speaking opportunities, then you got to get your pitches together or certain content ideas that support that talk that you want to give. If you decide that you want to go hard on advertising, then you need to think about those content topics that you want to put out as advertising content. Okay, so you see how that works? You're not thinking in isolation. You need to think strategically and match those content ideas to the activities or the purposes that you have in mind for your planning period. The next thing that you want to think about is your content pillars, meaning what are those broad categories or themes of content that you've decided early o'clock that you are going to speak to. As far as possible, you want to have content ideas that map back to all the content pillars that you have so that you have a variety and you're not accidentally focusing on just one type of content, because you know what you want to be known for, you know how you want to show up, as you want to make sure that you have a spread of ideas that cover all of the content pillars that you have in mind. The next thing that you want to think about are your audience needs and beliefs. So what are those challenges, those obstacles, those secret worries, those pain points, those false beliefs, those misconceptions, those limiting beliefs that you want to target in your planning period, all right? And again, if you've done the strategy work, you would have already had a list of all of those bits of information about your audience that you can just reference when it's time to brainstorm your content topics. Because the idea here is that your content ideas, not only do they need to meet your marketing objectives, not only do they need to be aligned with your content pillars, but they also need to be relevant and resonant with your audience as well. And then the final thing you want to take into consideration as you're brainstorming your content ideas is what's the content angle that you're going to go for each of these ideas. Now, content angles are so important in making your content idea interesting. It's simply the viewpoint or the storytelling frame in which you're going to approach that idea. And you know, sometimes we as service providers think that this idea has been beaten to death. Other people in our industry have covered it over and over again. But the thing is, if you can come up with a different angle from which to approach that idea, then all of a sudden it seems fresh again and you're invigorated and more motivated to talk about it, all right? You bring it alive. So I recommend that when you're brainstorming your content ideas, take that time to also think about the angle from which you want to approach it. And as that angle arises, you're also going to have a sense of what the title for that content is going to be, because that title will reflect that angle. And guess what? When you're coming up with content ideas, you do need to think about that title hook or headline for that piece of content. And this is so very important because this is one of the ways in which you hook attention from your audience. If you want your audience to consume the rest of that content, you need to catch their attention first. And guess what? If you cannot capture the attention of your audience, they're not going to stick around for the rest of your content. So when you're coming up with content ideas, think about the angle and at the same time use that opportunity to come up with a title hook or just a headline that reflects the angle that you're going forward with. Now, if you take into consideration all those elements when you are coming up with content ideas, what you should end up with is a spreadsheet that lays out the marketing objective, the content pillar, the audience need or belief that you are zeroing in on, your content angle, and of course, your title hook or headline for that content idea. And why that level of detail? Because when it's time for you to create content, you are not going to be guessing. You know exactly who are you going to be creating content for, exactly what's the angle you're going to take, and that's going to influence your message structure for that particular piece of content. Don't say I didn't tell you. Once you've planned your content, the next step is to actually sit down and script or write that content. Personally, I script content once per week for all my chosen platforms. For you, that may be different, but I'm just telling you how my brain works, okay? I like to script content once per week. Other people script content for the entire month. That's not my style. So you need to sit down and figure out what your working style is. I script at least one long form piece each week for YouTube and then at least 2 pieces for Instagram, although I publish at least 5 times a week on Instagram. And the reason why I'm able to do that is because I do a lot of repurposing. Now, because I do so much repurposing from my long form content to Instagram short form content, I work with the end in mind. So what does that mean? Well, when I structure my long form content, I always think in terms of how am I going to introduce each main point in my long form content. Because when it's time to clip them up and use them for my Instagram, I want to ensure that each of my points have enough context for them to stand and sit on their own. Now that can only happen if you work with the end in mind. So that's why you need to at least set aside some time to sit and properly think through what are those main points and what are those ideas that you want to capture for those main points. Now, I do script some short form pieces directly for Instagram as well. And here I'm just thinking about clarity and how can I quickly get one key message across. As a content strategist, I figured out a long time ago that to do any of these activities in content planning easier is you've got to have a content system. And part of my content system for creating short form content is to draw from my library of content scripts or message flows. So basically, I have a bunch of different content script templates. Sometimes I call them message flows that map back to different types of content that I want to create. So let me give you an example. Let's say if I wanted to do a myth busting or perspective shifting short form content piece. So I have a content script template or a message flow that says to do this type of content, I first need to draw attention to whatever that myth is, reveal the truth, give an example of what I'm talking about, reframe whatever idea or concept that I want to get across, and end with a call to action on whatever step that I want my audience to take next. See, that's a simple 5-part message flow. And because I know exactly the structure of that content piece, it doesn't take me a whole lot of time to actually write or script or think through the message for a particular content piece. That, folks, is an example of what I mean by having a system. So if you don't want to be one of those service providers who sit and when it's time to write, you have a block and you have no idea exactly what you want to say to bring forth the message that you want to deliver, then a good idea is to have some message flows or content script templates that you can refer to when you're just not in the zone and you're not able to get those ideas out in a proper flow or structure. If you're interested in more about how I do this, I do offer power scripting sessions. So you get to sit with me for about 90 minutes and I show you exactly how to apply this method so that you can crank out content with more confidence. And you can do this much more quickly. It won't take you a whole lot of time just to get your ideas down on paper. Just click the link below in the description and follow the instructions given. Once your content is scripted and it's a video piece, the next step is to record that content. Now, for me, I record once per week and I never script and record on the same day. If I do that, I would surely burn out. And I bet you that it's the same for a lot of you experts and service providers, particularly if you are not mature in content creation or you don't have a team around you to do content. So I advise all my clients to split the scripting and the recording of their content into 2 separate days. And that's only so that you can conserve your creative energy. Now, you should have a little checklist of activities that you need to keep in mind when you're recording. First of all, clean your camera lens. I cannot tell you how many times I have recorded without cleaning the lens, and it shows. It comes across blurry. It looks like I have no lighting on, and I'm always like, I forgot to clean the lens. So I'm telling you, make that number 1 on your checklist. Remember to clean your lens. And also think about the space in which you're going to be recording content. You just want to clean up your space and make sure that there's not too much clutter around you. You don't need to have a fantastic background. You just need to have a clean background. Okay? The other thing that you want to remember, so important for that checklist, is your sound. There are times when I started to record and I forgot to turn on my microphone. That is so annoying. Save yourself the trouble and make sure that that is included in your recording checklist as well. Once your content is recorded or written, the next step is editing. Now, if content creation doesn't energize you, you don't have a team around you, and you're still building the habit or the skill of content creation, then I do not recommend that you record and edit at the same time. Okay, that's gonna burn you out. Remember, one creative task at a time. So you may need to allocate another day for editing your content. Now, personally, for me, I'm much more mature in my content creation process and systems and skills. And so I am able to have my recording or writing and editing done on the same day. Now, I am going to recommend to you that you use tools, okay, to help you get editing done a lot faster. So, for example, if it's a written piece of content, Canva is an excellent tool for non-designers to use to edit your written piece of content, lay it out, get your graphics together. And investing in Canva Pro is an actually good option, and they're not paying me to say that. And why? Because with a Canva Pro subscription, you do not need to hunt all over to find good stock images or good video images if that's what you want to include in your content pieces, okay? And the second thing you want to have, templates. You should not be starting from scratch every time when you are laying out your written content. If you're doing a carousel, ensure beforehand that you've chosen a carousel template. And the good thing again with Canva Pro is that they have a bunch of templates that you can use. All you need to do is to customize it to your brand colors, and you can easily lay out your carousel or even your single post images. When it comes to editing video content, again, having the right tools that serve you is going to cut down so much time in that editing process. One very good tool for people who are not as mature in content creation is Descript. Now, I'll tell you two things about Descript that's really going to help you in terms of editing. They are able to automatically detect silences in your video and also repetitions in your video and take them out. Now that saves you so much time in editing, because when you have to do that manually, that sucks up all of your time. They also have the ability for you to edit via the script. Now it's much faster to read than to play your video and look for the errors and take them out. So Descript is a wonderful tool to help you do that very quickly. For short form pieces, there is InShot. So that's another tool that you'd probably want to look into if you are editing videos on your own. Now I do advise as well, particularly for short form content, that you do use templates in your videos as well. Again, this is for those of you who are not mature in the skill of creating content. Even for me as a content strategist, I use templates in my creative style for my short form videos. So I do a lot of talking head videos, and there are usually certain words in my script that I want to emphasize. And what I have done is come up with a templated version of emphasizing those pieces, all right? So if there's a word that I want to highlight, then it's usually going to come up as a text overlay on a blue background. And I do this over and over. I am not about to make content creation more complex than it needs to be, because for my audience, the contents of what I'm saying is much more important than having fancy graphics. And now the final step in your content planning is publishing or distribution, all right? This is how you get your content out to your audience. And one very handy tool that you want to use here to guide you is your content calendar. Now, before you go plugging your topics into your content calendar, ensure you know what your focus for that week, that month, or that quarter is going to be, and then that's going to help you pull the right topics. And of course, if you did your strategy work, you would have already ensured that in your content ideation phase, you would have brainstormed topics that make sense for whatever marketing push that you need to do in your planning period. So if you know your focus is awareness, the majority of your topics are going to be focused towards visibility building. If you know your focus is lead generation, you've got to have the majority of your topics focused on generating leads. If your focus is on sales, the majority of your topics need to be focused on sales. This is not rocket science. It's logic. It's proper planning, all right? And it's also showing that you have your strategic cap on. If you are publishing content on Instagram, you need a caption to go along with whatever that post is. Now, personally, I don't spend a lot of time on captions, and that's because most of the time my post does the heavy lifting for me. Now, if my post is the kind of post that is driving people to look to the caption, that's where I put a lot of effort into the caption. And usually I would have done that work already in the creation phase of my content planning. But if it's not that type of post, then I would advise that you use AI to just scan the script of whatever you are posting and then come up with a caption that complements that post. I really don't think that you need to spend all that time writing your caption if it's not the focal point of that particular post. When it comes to publishing my Instagram content in particular, after I would have created or recorded and drafted all my captions, I actually put it into draft form on Instagram. So on the day that I'm ready to publish, I just click publish. All right, so publishing doesn't have to take a whole lot of time if you just do the uploading beforehand. All right, one pro tip that I have for you, and I saved it for last, and I think this is actually going to be one of the biggest takeaways that you get from this video on content planning, is it's a good idea to create a production schedule. All right, so in the same way that you have a publishing schedule that tells you what you are going to post when, your production schedule tells you what activities in your content planning you're going to do when. All right. So after you've come up with your content ideas, get your spreadsheet out with your content production schedule and pull those content ideas that you want to move forward with for that planning period, whether it's the week, whether it's the month or the quarter, and decide what days of the week you are going to write, record, edit, repurpose. This you can refer to each week as you set about creating and publishing content. It is going to be a handy and integral part of your system. Even if you're working with a team, it helps to keep everyone on the same page. Don't say that I didn't warn you. Remember, none of this works unless you do your strategy work up front. No one builds a house without first laying the foundation. And if you want some more insight on how to go about creating your content strategy, then check out this video right over here.